the social, and it's the stigma, it's the ability when you're growing up wanting to do sport to find a teacher or a coach who is comfortable enough to allow you even to be part of the team, who's there, because it's not so uncommon to hear stories whereby teachers will say that they just don't feel that they can take the responsibility there, that there's the level of support within a changing room. If you're doing a team sport, that you feel as though you're not going to be at risk of being kind of ostracized from that. If you are having to kind of deal with additional considerations, or even just injecting in and around sports, team sports don't allow for kind of pauses in oftentimes. Like if you're doing something like football or rugby, it's very difficult to monitor your glucose continuously through those games. You can't control the pace or the intensity. So it's all of these different things as well.
Exercise, regular movement, sports, all these things are really powerful tool when it comes to life in general, and also life with type 1 diabetes. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that topic today. Today, I'm joined by Sam Scott, CEO of Enhanced, and we're going to take a look at exercise and type 1 diabetes. Why is it so complicated? What can we do to make it less complicated? And what happens if we do sports that are outside the gym in more extreme conditions? Sam, tell me, why is it so tricky to work out or do exercise when you live with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, so thanks a lot for having me. It's great to be here in Berne. So we were discussing a bit beforehand. So it's difficult on a physiological level, but there's also all of the different societal and individual challenges that make exercise and physical activity really challenging. So on a physiological level, a really basic sort of point of view, when you start doing exercise, there's all kinds of physiological and chemical things that are happening, which results in big shifts in your blood glucose. And if we start off by talking about somebody who does not have type 1 diabetes, so I don't have type 1 diabetes. If I start doing exercise, one of the first things that will happen is that my body will stop producing insulin. The reason is because insulin is the hormone that's going to cause my blood glucose levels to go down if I've eaten a meal recently. And also muscle contractions, so exercise, these trigger pathways within the skeletal muscle that causes glucose to go lower. So the danger becomes, if you have muscle contractions plus insulin when you're doing physical activity, that your blood glucose is going to decline really rapidly. And this is where we see the kind of risk of hypoglycemia really increasing. But if it was only as simple as that, then all you would have to look out for is just hypos and just basically say, okay, let's just reduce insulin at the onset and then that's it. But it depends on the timing, the intensity, also if the event is competitive. So just to give some examples, competitive exercise tends to cause your glucose to rise quite rapidly. And this is because you'll experience sharp increases in hormones like adrenaline. And these act to release huge amounts of glucose from the liver. And there's all of these different things that are sort of coming into play that just makes physical activity and exercise very challenging.
So it's not as simple as to say, okay, before I go to the gym, I'll have half a banana and hope that'll do the trick.
No, not at all. But not necessarily. Maybe that works under specific circumstances. If you know exactly what you're going to do during that session, and you know that having that half banana is going to work. But no, it takes understanding, roughly speaking, how your body is going to respond under a certain type of exercise so that you can plan accordingly.
So I guess, first of all, every exercise, I guess, is different. I mean, I guess it makes a difference whether you run a marathon or you lift weights as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can look on this at different levels, starting at sort of the most simplistic level and then build on top different layers. So I said before that muscle contractions will cause your blood glucose to decline. And this happens from an intensity of exercise as low as walking. So if you start walking, you'll have muscle contractions and you'll start seeing a decline in your blood glucose. And generally, the pattern of blood glucose response is that low intensity exercise, so things like a low intensity bike ride or a low intensity jog, these sorts of exercise sessions will cause a steady decrease in your blood glucose, whereas doing very heavy, intense exercise, such as sprinting or heavy weightlifting, this more likely than not causes a big increase in your blood glucose. And then there's different things in between, depending on all kinds of different factors. The marathon example that you gave, it depends on the speed at which you're running, partly. It also depends on factors like the amount of insulin that you have on board, the type of technology that you're using to administer your insulin. It depends on what food you've consumed before that session, at what point you start to become glycogen depleted. I think basically what I'm trying to say here is that you can just add layer upon layer of complexity, and that's what it is. I think
that's why it's
something that's very complicated.
Yeah. You said an interesting thing, and that is that it depends on how you administer insulin as well. Could you tell me more about that? Is that whether you use MDI or a pump and how that works differently, or?
It depends in the way it's not kind of set in stone, but it's sort of, so if you take, for example, if you are using MDI, you're going to be bolusing most of the time with meals. Say, for example, you eat in the period leading up to an exercise session. Chances are you've administered insulin there. The considerations would be whether you reduce the amount that you bolus. It's just the different considerations that are going to be there compared to if you're using a pump. You're going to have to change the considerations around the amount of insulin that you administer with that meal. With a pump, you may choose to suspend the system, or you may choose to disconnect entirely. There are certain situations where you may choose to do that. And then on top of the way in which it has a difference for how the insulin is administered, there's also differences in the fact that some people in certain sports don't like using a pump unless it's a tubeless pump, because they're attached to something and they fear that they'll get it caught.
Like anything like contact sports, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you've talked about a lot of professionals in the industry. Is there like a trend? Could you say that it's more people who are professionals using MDIs actually because of the fact that you have something attached to you? Or is that...
I have seen some things. So so when I used to work in professional cycling, what we would see, which was kind of counterintuitive, was that the more experienced the more experienced cyclists, i.e. those in the sort of the first team, the professional team, were more likely to be using MDI. And this was often questioned by clinicians who would say, but if you use a closed loop, you could have better time in range, or you could have better control over what insulin you're administering. But there's the additional social and individual factors that make that choice important as well. It's not necessarily what works. And I think this is important as well when it comes to type 1 diabetes blood glucose management, is it's not necessarily what works on paper, which translates to real life. So there's different factors like not wanting to have a pump failure when you're on the other side of the world, not wanting to have a crash and experience like where you pull your pump out or you break it. It also could have been social factors whereby the younger athletes coming through saw that the more experienced professionals were using MDI and they looked up to them and decided to sort of switch accordingly. There's all kinds of things that don't match necessarily to what could be seen as like an overly academic approach. But there's other sports as well. Like if you take something like rugby, I can't imagine somebody using a pump when playing rugby, like a pump with a cannula where they're going to have to be attached to that.
Honestly, even I think a patch pump is still the amount of times that I've ripped out my Dexcom sensor, not even a pump. I can't imagine how that is during a full contact sport, you know, even a patch pump that sits on your arm. It's still a full contact sport. So I think you don't really want to run around in a competitive environment and then having to fear that your pump's going to be ripped off.
Yeah, I think it's as well
an
what you're
additional
comfortable
stress
with.
factor, basically.
Yes, yeah.
So I read, it wasn't too long ago, I think, that Alexander Zverev won the French Open with type 1 diabetes. He has type 1 diabetes. And I find that impressive because tennis, I used to play tennis when I was a kid. I had type 1 diabetes already. You never know how long the match is. It can be 20 minutes if you're really good or really bad, but it can also be 2.5 hours. And you have periods where you run around, but then you also sit. I don't understand. I think it's impressive how you manage something like that. On a professional level, I mean, you're in the finals of one of the world's biggest Grand Slams, and you mentioned adrenaline before as well. So I guess that there's a lot of different factors that play into it in a situation like that.
Yeah, tennis is probably the sport which I least understand how you can compete at such a high level, be so successful and manage your glucose in and around that, because the inability to plan or know what is going to happen, I just don't imagine how he does that. I guess that there's certain, I don't know, I guess you'd really have to start breaking it down into different scenarios, where scenario one, but it's as well, we were discussing this before recording, and it's where you've got to have your mind separated constantly onto thinking about your type 1 diabetes, whereas your competitor is 100% able to focus on the event itself. So it's the fueling to ensure that you've got the energy to make it through. It's the ability to cope with the pressure, and if you have the technology that you're relying on as well is really important. Yeah.
And I guess, and maybe that's changing a bit, but I've read a lot of things about like stigma related things that I think a lot of professional athletes, and I think he was actually one of them, didn't want the public necessarily to know about their type 1. I mean, it's a fine line, and I know that from maybe not necessarily sports, but other situations where I also kind of don't want to turn it into a big deal, you know? I think if I would be in a competitive environment, sports, or where I have to function, I probably wouldn't rest as long as I would after a low blood glucose when I'm at home on my couch. I would give myself a lot more time, but then you have the pressure and the stigma, and I guess from that perspective, how it's perceived is also not the easiest thing.
Yeah, and this is where with type 1 diabetes in sport, I think it's not just the physiological part and the technology related aspects. It's the social, and it's the stigma. It's the ability when you're growing up wanting to do sport to find a teacher or a coach who is comfortable enough to allow you even to be part of the team who's there, because it's not so uncommon to hear stories whereby teachers will say that they just don't feel that they can take the responsibility there. that there's the level of support within a changing room. If you're doing a team sport, that you feel as though you're not going to be at risk of being kind of ostracized from that. If you are having to kind of deal with additional considerations, or even just injecting in and around sports. Team sports don't allow for kind of pauses in oftentimes. Like if you're doing something like football or rugby, it's very difficult to monitor your glucose continuously through those games. You can't control the pace or the intensity. So there's all of these different things as well.
So with all these different factors that kind of come into play when it comes to exercise and type 1, is there research carried out, and how is it done? Because how do you even do that in a controlled environment? And then if it's controlled, how can you sort of translate this into the real world?
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of research in type 1 diabetes in sport, but it's, I would say it's still massively under investigated. It's a really complex area to really look into in detail. So the way that it generally happens is that the major focus, at least for the last kind of 15, 20 years, has been around minimum physical activity levels. So it's been looked at more on the level of, we need to help people to get into reaching their minimal physical activity guidelines, rather than are we looking to help somebody achieve X, Y, and Z from a performance perspective. And when I mean that is the physical activity guidelines in most countries, I know they are in the UK, is 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week. And then you've got kind of resistance training as well, where people are suggested. But it's not under competitive situations. It's not under such varying situations. And so as a result, most of the studies have been done looking at having outcomes which are just reducing the risk of hypoglycemia during low to moderate intensity bike rides. And most people don't want to do that. The other thing is that they tend not to be overly the number of participants who will take part in those studies is extremely small oftentimes, and then they're looking to control situations to really look at the impact of the type or intensity of exercise, which unfortunately means that by the time these studies reach clinicians to pass them on to the patients that they're working with, they just don't work in real life, because then there's the additional factors like you're not represented within the group that was studied, or you're on a different technology now that is now further forward or more advanced than what was available during the study, or that you're doing competitive or more unpredictable sports. So it's really a challenge.
So is the research also usually in very like cycling, running type of things, not so much like team sports?
There are some studies that have been done in team sports, but they tend to be observational, whereby they will look at groups who are doing these sports, and they tend to be few and far between. The majority of lab-based studies, they're on either a bike, mostly on a bike in the lab. The intensity tends to be stuck in place. There's no variety there, and they'll quite often be 30 to 45 minutes, and that's kind of the maximum. Yeah.
And that doesn't represent, I guess, what most people actually do. I mean, when I look at my type 1 bubble, the sports types of exercises people do, it's so much more than just being on a cycle for 30 minutes at home, you know, as you say, competition, adrenaline, all of these things. But also, and that's actually something I would like to talk about, just extreme conditions. I mean, I know from myself, even if, I don't know, I play tennis or I go to the gym or I go for a run, I have access to my CGM, for example. I see my glucose, I can have food with me, but that already changes, I guess, for people who swim. I don't know, something like triathlon or triathlon,
Yeah.
where you have to run, but then you also swim. What do you even do? You can't really bring your phone, I guess, or, more extreme sports that don't really allow for that type of control.
So triathlon, there's a lot of people I know with type 1 who do triathlon. And I don't think it's too bad because when you're training, you tend to break the sports down individually. It's only when you put it together. I'm not saying that it's easy by any means, because then I just caught myself as like, yeah, but then you have the big change where you start introducing like the competition and all the craziness that goes around an event. But you are at least able to have some level of control over each of the three sports, and you can train with them. And you can have visibility in at least some of it. Like when you're cycling, you could have your CGM, which is on your headset, to be able to see. You will have done the swim first, and the swim is not too long for triathlon. So when you've got through this,
How long is it?
It depends on the site. I think I'm going to make a mistake.
Okay, it's because I think for me swimming is really. Whenever I swim, I'll have a hypo after. I feel like it doesn't matter how much I eat before I swim, and it goes down. And so it's interesting to me, I guess, when it's outside of these controlled, I sit on a bike types of situations. But then I think you were also telling me about someone who's skydiving. And that must be, I mean, how does that work? Because I've never done it. But if I think about it, I think my adrenaline goes up jumping out of a plane, So.
Yeah, so there's a few sports like this where people really want to do, it's part of just living life to the full. So she was explaining that there was a big challenge in getting the approval from her doctor to be able to do it. That was really the big thing. And she wanted to do the training to be allowed to do regular jumps. And she said she's done it numerous times now with no problems. She does, from her experience, she said that having hypos afterwards was a problem because the huge adrenaline surge during the lead up and then the jump, and then afterwards kind of you've sort of cleared like your liver out, I guess, because the adrenaline that's been there. But we were also talking about scuba diving. That was another sport that you said that you have experience with.
Yeah, I also struggled getting my doctor to sign a letter, to be honest. That was even before I went into the water. I'm like, wow, here it starts. I don't even have my fins on, and already people are making my life hard. I got there eventually. But for me, it's tricky because you're basically blind for 2 hours. Like I'm so used to having my Dexcom 24/7. If I go to sleep, I know it'll wake me up. It'll have an alarm, or I can feel it vibrate, whatever. If you're diving, you just don't have any of that. And not only for those 60-ish minutes that you're in the water, you also don't really have it when you set up your gear or when you get out of the water. And it's really, I think I really needed to learn how to trust my body.
Okay.
I think for me that was a big one. It's like, okay, I'm down there on 30 meters. Will I even feel a hypo? Because I know I feel it when I'm on land, but how does it feel when you've been, I don't know, in 28-degree water for 60 minutes and you're fighting some current, then you're swimming, or you're going on a dive with like a swimming pool and you're just super relaxed, no adrenaline, you're just looking at cute fish, and then maybe you were too conservative and you ate something before and then it shoots you up because you ate 30 grams of carbs for no reason. So I guess because it's in the ocean, it's quite unpredictable due to the conditions, and basically you're blind in very unpredictable conditions. And when I first went diving for the first time, I was so scared about going low that I said to my instructor back then, can I practice how to eat in the water, like gummy bears or something? It's disgusting. Okay. So that's also like, I don't want to do that. It's not nice swallowing a bunch of salt water while you're in a hypo just to get a few gummy bears, so.
And what were you basing that on? You were basing that on like an amount of time? Because did you have visibility on your glucose to
No.
be? So what did you do? Did you kind of have a rule where you would have so many?
When I eat, or like,
Yeah, like when you were under the water, how
Mhm.
did you know when you wanted to have that, or were you just
It
doing
only
it
happened
yourself?
twice. I was doing it once just as an exercise the first
Okay.
time, and it was so disgusting that I was like, under no circumstances would I do this if I had another option.
Okay.
And to be honest, let's say a dive is 60 minutes. If in the beginning I won't go low in 5 minutes because I see my glucose, if I'm a bit low, I eat something. So let's say after 30 minutes, I feel a bit shaky, you know, and it's still, I know now that I will know if that is due to exhaustion or due to my blood glucose being
Okay.
low. And if it's already 30 minutes into a dive and I feel like I'm going low, for me, that's just, okay, goodbye. I'm going to go up, because I eat something, it takes at least 15 minutes until it kicks in. And then probably, realistically speaking, another 10 until I feel fine. Then my dive's already over and I have 25 uncomfortable minutes somewhere in the middle of the ocean where I don't really know always what the conditions are like. So
Okay.
I gave it a lot of thought before I did it. And long story short is that if I feel shaky in the water and I can go up, I go up.
Okay.
Because it's not very enjoyable. I've done it twice where I was diving with a bit of a low. And it's not enjoyable. It's like you said, you're only focused then on your diabetes and the fact that you feel not well.
Yeah.
And then I just rather don't do it. But that was a learning that I had to make on my own. And it's also a learning is that it's actually not as tricky in that sense, because most of the time you don't swim against the current for 60 minutes. But I think, and that's probably for a lot of people who exercise, it's a lot of trial and error, you know, like for me, it works not eating as long as I can, basically, because any bolus is some sort of additional risk factor.
Yeah.
So I guess with these things, for me, it's trying to see what works and accepting the fact that you will not have a full picture. And I know a lot of people who tell me I would love to go diving, but I'm really scared. Fair, but I also think, you know, especially endocrinologists are a bit too concerned. I mean, there's ways to manage it.
I had a look at this before this conversation, and it was true that it wasn't possible to do diving before if you had type 1 diabetes, but
Yeah.
there were studies looking into whether you were actually at greater risk, and there isn't any difference. It could be just because you're more cautious in general, that you're not taking as many risks in general, but it does seem as though it is safe. They've even in a lot of countries reduced because there was a restriction on under 18s not being able to do it, but now it's if you're over 14, I think you're allowed to do it. So with the right precautions, it can be there. I was reading as well, I didn't know if this was true though, that you suggested you have to eat quite a lot in the lead up to it.
Before a dive?
Yeah, that's what it was suggesting from what I read, but I don't know if that's
as a
true.
recommendation to go diving. I don't understand why. Maybe I don't have the full picture. For me, it's like if I eat a lot, that means I bolus. And usually, I don't know, when you go diving, coming from a place in Central Europe and a landlocked country, when I go diving, the food will be different from the food that I eat here. I go to Indonesia, I eat rice 3 times a day. My body's already confused. So why would I do this to myself before a dive to eat a lot and then have an additional factor that can go wrong? But, you know, for some people that works better. And I think that's kind of, in a nutshell, for me, you need to find out what works.
It could be, again, these protocols were overly on the cautious side, because what they were saying was don't bolus. I think if you were under 12 millimoles and eat a lot, but they were very much on the side of just avoid hypos at all, which of course is the thing. But it seemed very much it was like just eat lots and lots of carbs beforehand. And
Great.
But maybe that's not how it's translated in real.
Yeah, I don't do it, and I'm usually fine.
Okay.
But obviously, what you want to avoid is having a hypo down there, because you can't just shoot up to the surface either. I mean, you can, but it's not ideal. So I think these is like a extreme kind of like conditions where I'm like, this is not really what people talk about that much. But maybe that's also because for a very long time it's not been recommended to do all of these things, which I think is a bit of a shame because, again, there's ways to manage it.
Yeah.
To round this up, because now we've talked about a couple of different things, and also what I hear from you a bit is that there's not always necessarily enough support. But I know that you're building something that might change that, and maybe you can tell all our listeners out there what you're working on and how that might make sports with type 1 a bit easier.
Yeah, thanks. So what we're building is something that we hope will have an impact across all levels of physical activity and sport when it comes to managing your glucose. So there's the data aspect in terms of being able to more easily understand how your glucose is changing in response to the physical activity, exercise, and then the other lifestyle related components. That's one part, but it's also the community side. So we've built up a global community of people doing exercise sport. And the goal is that people can easily find other people who are interested in the same sports as them, or just feel as though they're not alone in trying different things or in what they're doing. And then the third part is education. So being able to better match what is happening to your glucose on an individual level with the science of why that would be happening. I think that if you have the explanation that goes with the data, it's more likely to be helpful for people. And so this is what we're doing. We're building really what I would describe as the ecosystem around type 1 diabetes and sports.
And you have the whole peer support component coming in, which I think as someone living with diabetes is really usually what has helped me the most. What has helped me the most in really anything. Peer support is just great. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to link the link to your app in our bio, so you can all take a look if you're interested in learning more about Enhanced. And of course, if you have any feedback or anything you want to share, you can send us an email to podcast@dcberne.com. Thanks for joining me today, Sam. That was super interesting. And I'm glad to see where the app journey takes you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.